Good morning, everyone. We'll start in just 1 minute. Okay, everyone. Good morning. It is slightly dark and dreary one where I am, so hopefully it's a bit sunnier where you are. Today we're going to be talking about effective negotiation. And I will be very frank, it is not my strength. I had definitely, as we walk through some of this stuff, rest assured, just because I talk to people about this doesn't mean I'm excellent at it, like many of the things we've talked about. We all have areas where we can grow. So I'm kind of hoping that you'll be able to think the same way for yourselves. And I would like to hope that there's an expert negotiator here on the call that can actually help all of us in terms of their approach to negotiation. As we walk through the different pieces, I've known for many years that I tend to be a bit of a softer negotiator than a harder negotiator. And we'll talk about that, probably not as much this session, maybe the next one, in terms of some of the characteristics of the different styles that we will walk through. So, so off we go. I'm going to just fix my screen here so I can see the chat a little better. Excellent. All right. So, okay, sorry, I kept getting muted, so I think I'm unmuted again. Hopefully if someone can hear me, you can send me a little note in the chat so I don't talk to myself. Something wrong with my telephone system. Excellent. Thank you, folks. I appreciate it. Nothing worse than talking to yourself. All right. So in terms of today and through the next session, what we're going to talk about is what actually is negotiation. So what is it? What does it mean? What is it something that we do every day? Is it something that we need to be doing? What does it look like? What's the process of negotiation? What's the general things that people look at? A lot of times we may negotiate things and we just don't think it through. So this will give you more of a little path or platform to think about, okay, so what do I need to think about going into a negotiation or a potential negotiation? Sometimes we don't know what sort of situation we're going to be in, whether it's with a client or a colleague or our boss. So we're going to walk through then some strategies and skills. I mean, this is a huge topic, so needless to say, we can't know everything in negotiation through all this, but hopefully we'll touch on enough pieces that you can either start practicing a few things, or you can actually go read some more on some other ones, or maybe even work with somebody or watch somebody who's a really good negotiator. The different styles, we all have natural styles. Lots of times that we've talked and we look at the different styles of different things. Well, this is no different. There are negotiation styles which slightly overlap the conflict styles that we've talked about before. There is a very strong connection between them. And the art form of negotiation. So as much as this is a very broad topic and there's hundreds and maybe even thousands and thousands of books on negotiation, there is an art form to it. Now, we can talk about it, but you're going to have to figure out yourselves which piece of that element of art do you do well, and maybe some areas like, I know I do some of I keep getting muted, folks. I don't know where I cut off. I have people that heard me, and then I'm cut again. Can you just let me know? Just a minute. Can you folks hear me? Okay, sorry about that. I have no idea where I cut off, and I'm not scripted. So we'll just start from where we left off. I have no idea where the system keeps muting me. So please, if you don't hear me for any period of time, because you know I'm a bit of a chatter, you can hear me talking, please let me know. That's like the fourth time the system has cut me off. So again, you know, what are we going to look at? We're going to look at some different things around negotiation. I want you to pick and think and choose some items that might work for you. So that's a nutshell. So what are some things that you actually negotiate? When would you negotiate, and what would you negotiate? Just send me a note in the chat about where you would actually be negotiating. Yes. Yes, those are some obvious ones that I thought of as well. Just knowing a little bit of your worlds. You get into new business, renewals, and you know, those are some really interesting ones. And I'm sure there's some suggestions, or you'll probably notice some of the gaps or some of the times when things have failed in your world, but also sometimes when you negotiate and you get just what you want. So it's something that we do think about our clients all the time. Having said that, is there anything in your world, personal or professional, that you can see yourself negotiating outside of those items? When would you negotiate something a little bit different? Yes, buying a car or a house. Oh gosh, the house part is so stressful. I don't know if anyone's done that. I never ever look forward. I've done it like 4 times, and I dread it every time. The house and the car. Yes, actually, we bought. I don't know if anyone's bought a car. Let me know if you've bought a car in the last year or so. And negotiating that, friends of mine often who aren't good at negotiating, bring me in. Again, I have my pros and cons to negotiate, but I understand the principles, and I can read people really well, which we'll talk about later. So any sort of things that stand out in those, like in buying a car, what's the most difficult thing in buying a car for some of you? Features, yes. What's the apples to apples, hey? What's the features? What do I need? What am I actually looking for? Do you have different dealerships? What does that mean? Oftentimes we don't know the markup. I think in our industries, generally we have a sense of what markups might be, but if you don't know the industry really well, it can be really stressful to know where's the negotiability. So how can someone negotiate? What can this person at this dealership, the salesperson, where can they go? Because I hear stories about markups in car dealerships. So what does that look like? I would throw out there, anyone ever negotiate with their kids? Anyone ever not negotiate with their kids? I have to say, this is one of the areas where that's a big deal. I love it. Drink your milk and I'll give you a cookie. No joke. We negotiate, believe it or not, we negotiate more often than you think. With friends, with family, with colleagues. It's just sometimes it's conscious and sometimes it isn't. So I want you to think about that, because sometimes it shows, like for example, with our kids, I have a different style than my husband does. So that gets a little interesting, because guess what? My kids want to go negotiate with him instead. So I guess I can be a little bit harder relative to my husband. So again, you know, you have to sort of look at it in context. You actually, if you say you're not negotiating, you need to negotiate deals. You actually negotiate deals a lot of the time. You're just not necessarily conscious of it. And we also know, probably right now, each of you would probably know exactly where your gap is. Where do you give in? Right? Are you a hard negotiator? Do you walk away from the table? Are you a softer one who probably gives in when you shouldn't? So again, our style does make a difference. And it does, it's again, nothing we can't overcome. All right, get my mouse back on here. All right, what other words would you use instead of negotiation? Is there any other word you could think of instead of negotiation? Bargain, yes. bargain. Some people say barter, depending on the situation it's in. Sometimes people use the word collaboration. It's a little different, and we'll talk about that. It's one of the styles that you can use, which can be extremely productive, but it's a little bit more challenging sometimes than what we're traditionally used to. So what else do we got here? Bribe. Yes, and no joke. Sometimes we just have to make, we have to make the pot a bit sweeter. We got to get it there. I mean, look at you folks. I'm sure your employer, whoever you work for or work with, are there, and it was negotiated to get you there. And sometimes, you get a superstar that you're willing to pay a bit more for. So we, as commodities as well, in terms of the insurance industry, to make it work and keep it going. So negotiation, yeah, there's a lot of different ways to look at negotiation, but essentially it's the same thing. So let's look and see exactly what it is. So it's two or more people. So you've got to have another person you're negotiating with. Although I would argue I sometimes do negotiate with myself, especially if I'm trying to get another chocolate bar or have another piece of my chocolate bar. But having said that, generally in the context of work, where we're talking here now, we have two people with differing views. Because if you don't have differing views, you're not really negotiating it. There has to be, otherwise you're just working together. So you have different views, different needs, and often different goals. So they work together to find a mutually acceptable and beneficial outcome. And one of the key things here is that there's an understanding that there is something to be gotten, shall we say. There's something that can actually be achieved that benefits the other person. Because otherwise, what's the point of negotiating? And we'll get a little more into that when we get into some of the terminology. So it can be persuasive. Now, I don't know if you guys were on the call before when I talked about influence and persuasion, but it plays into this as well. Sometimes you will influence somebody, but sometimes you actually, through that influence, you actually have to negotiate something. It could be a simple thing of trying to get someone on board to work on a new project, something new offering or something that you want to do, and you need to sweeten the pot. I won't say that you'd bribe there, Mark, but you need to sweeten the pot, right? So sometimes you need to add a little more to it. So is it influence, or is it to get them to come along your way, or do you actually sometimes negotiate as well? They can be used very much in tandem. And in terms of the best possible deal, people do not want to walk away feeling they've been gypped. Now let's face it, come on, your clients, think about your clients, think about your colleagues. The relationship is going to be critical, and you'll see that weaving in through all of the conversation we're going to have today and next time. The conversation around the relationship and what does that mean, right? Is it something that you're going to see? If I was off in Australia and I was negotiating or haggling on buying say a handmade coat down in Australia, chances are the relationship's not that important, but generally speaking, the people that we work with every day, whether it's clients, our families, whoever it is, that's got to be key. So there has to be a win of some sort on each side. The question is, what does that look like? All right. Now, we have $2. Tell me about some approaches or thoughts or ideas or first steps that you would use and how to decide how to split it. We've got, I don't know how many people on the call. Let's just say there's 20-odd people on the call, and we've got $2. Yes, maybe this is 100 years ago. How do we decide to split it? What could you think about or consider? Yeah, you could, we've got fairly 10 cents each. You could just say we're going to do a straight down the board, 10 cents each. So that's great. Thanks for starting with that. And what would make you think that that may not work? It may be perfectly legitimate, don't get me wrong, but what would make you think that maybe that would not work? Would that be fair? What other considerations would you have to think that that maybe couldn't be fair or wouldn't be fair for the people involved? Someone said, yeah, you're doing all the work. Absolutely. Maybe I should get more. Maybe I'm the one coordinating all this and I should get 20 cents. And then maybe you guys can all split it. How would everyone feel about that? Right? So again, what is somebody's point of decision? Do I deserve more? And if so, why? Do I need more? Am I all of a sudden going to start my own lemonade stand and I'm going to go and I need more? It's really important for me that I need more money. So I'm going to what I'm going to do? I'm probably going to fight for that money. I'm going to think that I deserve more. So this is when you start getting into really something interesting when you get into negotiating. It's probably more realistic, right? I've seen people split money before. I've seen people actually just recently, and a client of mine, they are partners and they actually, one person left the company, and just their sense of negotiating, watching that actually happen in front of my eyes and working with both parties actually to try to help manage their own selves through coaching, on each side. And it's challenging. It's extremely challenging, and it can become quite personal. And this is where hopefully some of the things we're going to talk about today will give you a little bit more objectivity to it. Because let's face it, emotion comes into play. Anytime you're negotiating, you have so if there's two people, if it's myself and you, so you're on one side of the table and I'm on the other side, or hopefully we're not, we're just sitting next to each other, chatting about it. But is that true? Because I might be representing an organization. I might be representing my household, whether it's personal or commercial lines, right? Or I might be representing my team, but also I'm representing myself. So there's two people at each side of that table. So you really have to think about, they're not always in tandem. I'm not always aligned. I know I'm here to get this for the organization, to get this for my family, to get this, but sometimes it's a personal need I have to win, right? Or to feel connected to somebody, or whatever it might be. So you really have to think about, what is it that person actually needs themselves, right? What are their needs? All right. All right, some common principles. So these are just some basic ones, right? We all consider that negotiation, we're not going to be at the table unless we believe that it's a better way to solve a problem or a difference of opinion or to get to where we need to go. Otherwise, what's the point? Okay, and we'll talk about that after, because at the end of the day, you really do have to have a walking away point at any point in time, which you really need to think through in advance. And I have a chance of persuading you. What's the point of going in if I don't think I'm going to fail? I have a thought that I think I deserve the 20 cents, and I think I can convince you of it. Okay? And I think I can get you guys to come around to my line of thinking. At the same token, I don't think I'm going to change from that. I'm going to hang on to that 20 cents. Hey, maybe I'll get more, right? I believe that I can actually hang on to that 20 cents as opposed to negotiate it, right? We often go in with, again, some different levels of where we think we are, but we have to have that fundamental positive belief that things are going to get better, that I can persuade you, I can bring you away to my line of thinking, and it can help you out as well. So how much is enough? And this is the one I sort of see a lot with negotiations, is that, again, it's a person. Some people, and think of yourselves now, just want to win, right? You want to walk away saying, yes, I got that renewal in, we had a percentage hike, whatever, or we're compensating for some other expenses we had and we had to increase the premiums, etc., whatever it is. Then all of a sudden, I got to win. Excellent. Is that enough? What is it that you need? Is it enough for the other person when they walk away? There's nothing worse, again, than walking away for something where you don't feel comfortable. You feel like, yeah, my broker didn't really offer me alternatives or didn't talk to me or whatever it might be. Is it enough for them, and is it enough for you? And what is behind your own needs? So just how much is enough is really important in negotiations. So there's two different types of negotiations. And I see this a lot often in other types of industries that are, unionized, as an example. There's different types of bargaining. The same principles are in negotiation period, okay? So if anyone's been in that environment, you'll certainly connect with a few of these concepts. So distributive bargaining or distributive negotiation, distributive is really around the win-lose. Okay, it's around essentially like a fixed pie. So we've got, X amount of dollars or X amount of pieces, and you're going to get a portion of that, and I'm going to get a portion of that. And that's it. It's a split. Okay, so we fight over that, and we argue and we posture and we do all those pieces. We often get when we're in that sort of mindset around, okay, so I know that I got the quotes back, or I know my colleague needs the following, and I got to get a piece of that. I got to get a piece of that, right? So it's all around fighting. It's not around the relationship. So again, some people more naturally lean towards that because it's about me winning over someone else, okay? So you hang on to that no matter what. Even if you know there's other things at play, you gotta win. So that's where I see that more often. I think most people, when we see the next one, will relate to it, but you also have to remember some people are very traditional in their approach, okay? And this is probably more traditional approach. And also it's sometimes people's natural place. I think everyone can understand that piece. You've got your $2, someone's gonna win, someone's gonna lose, or I'm gonna win more than you. So then you get integrative. Now, in this type, it's a win-win. So how you're thinking, how can that be? How can we possibly win-win? So it's a sense of understanding what can happen. So I know that I want A, B, and C. I want this renewal. I want to get this client. Maybe I want a longer term relationship with this client. And my win is getting the renewal, but just improving that relationship. I don't know if they trust me, right? That could be a win for me. So what's a win for the client? Maybe the client's been pushing back on some additional increases in certain areas, okay? So again, if your win is to create that better relationship, so that's your need, that's your interest that's at play, other than just the renewal, and then you've got the other person that has a different perspective, then technically you can both win. This isn't what's called a zero-sum game, right? This is where people theoretically don't have to have nobody's going to win, or you're going to win, or I'm going to win. We can both win, okay? You have to really work together for this, though. There has to be a little bit of give on both sides to some extent in just communication, understanding, and we'll talk a little bit more about that and some of the things that you can do to figure it out. So, you know, their needs, their desires, their concerns, and their fears. So remember, if you know the person that you're talking to, if you really understand them, no different when I talk about employees, if you really understand the person, and you could be negotiating with your employees, but whoever it is, you have to understand them. You have to understand what's driving it, what their style is, what their personality is, what they generally get excited about, right? What gets them really jazzed up? How can you connect with them in that way? How do you learn more about them? So all those things come to play in terms of negotiating as well. And again, this is very fundamentally a principle around creating better relationships. Because if I walk away from my broker, or even just buying a car, if I walk away feeling that I won, right? Not at all costs, but I got what I wanted. I feel confident. What's the chances I'm going to be working with that person? What are the chances I'm going to go back to that dealer and say, or that specific car salesman or salesperson, happened to be a salesman, my last one, and maybe refer business onto him, right? Which I have done actually. So how can you actually do that? Just a longer term perspective. All right. So we all think we can win-win, but that doesn't always happen. Let's face it, right? Sometimes things fail. Now, I've experienced this many times, and I'm curious to see if anybody else has anything to share here. And it doesn't have to be about work-related as such, you know. When do you fail? So, for example, I am famous, don't take advantage of this, but I am famous for bringing down if I put a proposal in for some work, for putting in a lower amount than I know I should, right? I tend to be a bit of a soft negotiator, and I kind of feel sort of, I'm just, I know they don't have a lot. I know they're struggling. Let me just drop it down here. Let me bring it down to here. And then theoretically, they could negotiate even further below. And oftentimes then I'm like, I think I'm working for nothing here. I don't know if anybody's ever seen that in terms of negotiating even a policy or working with someone on something where you kind of give away the farm. And then you kind of look back and you go, wow, I can't believe I did that. So again, you don't have to tell me as such in the chat, but I'm thinking that's probably happened to a few people on the call. And again, that was a description of a soft negotiator, not a hard negotiator. So I'm doing a little better than I have in the past. So what actually causes failure? So can you tell me about what you think causes failure? When things break down. Confidence, love that. Yes, Petra, thanks. Confidence is huge. And I'm hoping that some of the things we walk through today in next session will give you some confidence to walk into those in a way that makes sense. Because let's face it, I think I have a quote in here too, around, are we born negotiators? Most people are not, okay? So yeah, we all have to learn, and sometimes we learn through mistakes, and that can cause a lot of problems. Overthinking things, interesting, yes. Having said that, you need to prepare, which we'll talk about. We need to think it through. We need to think about ourselves. We need to think about others. But there is a process that you can walk through. But yes, overthinking it and overanalyzing it, and maybe even, you know, thinking that you're reading something in somebody or their motives that isn't there. So absolutely, I've seen that as well. Yeah, the sympathy you have, absolutely, right? You know, if you're someone who's extremely, you know, in touch with feeling for others and, oh, you know, oh, I'm going to see what I can do on that, or I'll come out and do that for free, right? We end up shooting ourselves in the foot. And at the end of the day, we need to have value for ourselves. There has to be a win-win. We can't be the ones to lose consistently over time as well. The organization loses, we lose, and we also, our confidence will even take a further hit. They're going to hate me. I love that. Yes, and let's face it, costs go up, markets change, right? You depend, you know, you're in a hard market. What type of market are you in? And how does that look? And do they understand? Are there regulatory changes? I know in Newfoundland Labrador we've had, you know, what is 15% tax on top? You know, do people actually understand what they're talking about? Is it apples to apples when they're looking at their competition, your competition, in terms of their quotes that they're bringing on? So negotiations fail for many, many reasons. So yeah, some of these have come up, right? Oftentimes I see this top one, this first one, more than you think. Some people just can't get over themselves and what they personally need, right? Now, having said that, our job as a negotiator is to actually adapt and try to meet those needs. Remember? Even if someone's really belligerent or however they are, our job for ourselves to win and for them to win is to get us where we need to go. Let's face it, some of our clients are challenging. Some of our colleagues can be challenging for us, right? So how do we actually look at the issues? What's at play here? What does this person need? You don't have to like it. You don't have to agree with it. But you have to understand what they need, okay? So often the personalities play into it, but you actually have to focus on the personalities to some extent, but there are issues that are at play, right? So it's not about judging the personalities. Thinking about our own needs, right? Oh, I really need to hit this mark. I got to hit this mark, right? What do they need? We often do not think about what they need. And we make the assumption, here's the other thing, we often make the assumption that the other person just needs a cheaper rate, which I'm sure many of you could tell me right now that that is not true. And that is not true for me as a purchaser, as a customer, right? Personal, obviously, a personal line for me. So if I'm purchasing something, it's not necessarily about that. I don't mind paying a little bit more if I have that connection, right? If I have that personal connection, I trust the people I'm working with in terms of the broker that I'm working with. So again, how do you consider both folks' needs? Getting too emotional. Now, this is where we've talked about getting triggered. We've talked about things. This is where I've seen things go off the rails. I've seen people just, you know, whether it's with me privately or with someone else, it's like they just throw up their hands, like, I just give up. This person's like, just, I can't work with this person. Or whether it's clients, this client is just too difficult. Now, sometimes that is true. And you and I know sometimes clients are worth getting rid of as well, right? If they're haggling to the nth degree, it's not real negotiation. They're just like, I got to get to the cheapest dime, right? Is it really worth your time in the long haul and the effort that you put in? But getting too emotional about it is what you often see really being a problem, and winning at all costs as well. Another one is the win, right? Like, is this, oftentimes when I do sessions and we talk about conflict or negotiating, I'll make people do an arm wrestling exercise. And I will say to them, and it's kind of fun to try if anyone hasn't done it before, you say, okay, you're going to arm wrestle with the person next to you. And I have a little description, and this essentially says you get a point for every time a hand, you know, the hand hits the table. And so some people immediately go to win, like, I got to win. And so you see people literally struggling, although I have to be careful, make sure no one hurts themselves. And then some people will naturally just look at each other And all of a sudden, what do you think they start doing? What could they start doing? So if I said to you, every time the hand hits the table, you're going to get a point. What do you think they could do? How could they make that a win-win scenario? Yeah, working together. No joke, right? Hey, we can both win here, right? You know, all we have to do is literally look at each other. And I'm just going to let a lot of people, what they do, you know, you'll see one person in a group, say there's 20 people, you'll see one couple that will just kind of all of a sudden one person will just go limp, kind of their way of communicating to the person, we can do this together. And then they just keep, you know, touching it and they get like 25, 30 points or whatever. And other people are stuck at 0. So it's not a zero, it could be zero sum. Some people actually, yeah, they just hold on. Zero sum game just means they hold on and nobody gets a point, right? Which is complete failure. That is absolutely an F. So think about it that way, right? How do you actually look at it from a different way? So again, the win-win, the win-lose, the win-lose, and the lose-lose. So we're focusing on, you need to focus on both of the objectives. All right, so the needs, I've talked about that already. The needs that we have in terms of negotiation. So what are the interests at play? What do I know? What do I know about my client? What do I know about my colleague? What do I know about my family member of what they need? And again, the person and the organization. If I know an organization's struggling, I can probably make some probable assumptions. Ideally, it would be facts. Now, if someone's publicly traded, that's a little easier. Or if you know about something, they just lost a bid. As an example, if you work in construction, like in industries with your clients in the construction industry, they just lost, you knew they were bidding on a project and you knew it went to someone else, right? What are the needs that place? Maybe it's somebody who's expanding and there's a risk analysis need. You're thinking, ooh, I think they probably are quite concerned over that, right? Maybe you can even add on to your offering to meet those needs, right? So how do you actually negotiate that? Make that sweet, like, I didn't say bribe, right, Mark? But how do you sweeten the pot a little bit if I know that's what they need? Because I also have to increase my premiums over here, right? I can't, the market's changed. These other, you know, costs in the market have changed, or maybe there's some big losses in the market and things have just increased, right? So what are the needs at play? There have to be options to be a negotiation. Has to be options. If there's no other option, then there's nothing you can do. Right? There's no point in negotiating at all. There have to be options. It can't just be, this is it, suck it up, buttercup, because there's absolutely no way you're going to have two parties at play. Is it legitimate? So this is a big one. This is where you get sort of into slightly ethical side as well. Is it legitimate? So if you're going to increase my premiums, or you're going to, you know, you're my colleague and you're going to make me, I have to take on new work, you know, maybe to my benefit as well, or I've got to help you out with something. It's got to be legitimate. It's got to be a fact, or it's got to be something that is real. And then it's got to be communicated that way, right? So it's got to, so in other words, if I see my premiums going up and you call me in advance and say, FYI, you're going to see a slight increase, the market has changed, blah, 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 and it's this, basically, this is legitimizing it. Right? But having said that, here's also what we're going to be able to do. I know you need this, or I know you need that, or our coverage is still good and it's still better than what's offered in the market. Your deductibles are still here, as you know, which are still better than other folks in the market, right? So again, it's got to be a legitimate thing that you're bringing to the table. Relationships are key. Talked about that already. There has to be an element of working together. There has to be an element of longer-term relationship. Communication is something we're talking about more next time, but how we actually conduct the nuances of how we communicate. What are we listening for? What are we looking for? How do we notice when we're moving through the stages of negotiation? And this is where you have to really be conscious of it, right? What you're saying, what you're not saying, what you're sharing and what you're not sharing. So we'll talk a little bit more about that next time. There has to be a commitment level. So in other words, we're walking away with a commitment, right? There's an action. It could be a contract, you know, in other words, most people look at it from a contract perspective, or again, I'm signing off to say, yes, we're going to move ahead with this with the following conditions, right? That meet both parties' needs. So negotiators with high aspirations consistently outperform those with low aspirations. So if I said to you that I'm going to go in and I'm going to purchase your house, I don't know if anybody watches House Hunters International or any of those. If you do, you'll very much relate to what I'm going to say. I'm fascinated when I watch some of these, because there's a house, actually I thought I'd mention this. There's a house somewhere in the Caribbean that this one couple was going to buy. And it was already dropped from $450,000 down to $400,000. So I was like, oh, and they said, the market, they've been on the market for a while. I'm thinking, okay, fair enough. They're going to go in at sort of 385 or something like that. And they lowballed it at like 300, or it was ridiculously low. And now, of course, we don't know the intricacies of what's going on in the background, and we assume this is legitimate and what we're hearing is true. And the person says, and they accepted the offer for $300,000. And I'm like, how is that possible? So they had very high aspirations in terms of what they were going to get, right? Would you say that's consistently true? That these people would actually have better outcomes? What do you think? Yes or no? Yeah, it's amazing how common it is, actually. And it's actually proven that negotiators that go in and ask to me, and this is where I'm a softer negotiator, not necessarily always the best approach, going in highballing it. I've got a client, a colleague of mine, to be frank, I mean, she's got from a different sort of background, but she's always, if I ask her about pricing or how we should price something out, I always go to her, because she's always telling me I'm lowballing it. I'm giving low aspirations. Okay. So they have lots of studies around it. So for example, in one mock negotiation, so if you hope to sell a property for $300,000, they're likely to get a higher price with someone who's aiming for. So in other words, if I'm looking for 300 and I go down to 200, if I start, now some people will just walk away, right? That's just ridiculous. But if somebody comes in with that, then what does it actually do? Sometimes what it does, you put forth that low bid, i.e. high aspirations of saving money, right? Sometimes people will sort of go, hold on now. That first number on the table that's pretty low. Well, are we too high? They came in this low. I mean, are we really too high on this? The market's a little slower out there. So all of a sudden, if they're hoping to get 300,000, or maybe they put it out for 300, they're coming in 275, and someone offers 300, they're either going to walk away or they're going to say, hold on now, maybe we got to rethink this. So sometimes it will actually do that. So people who aim low risk underestimating how much room there is for agreement. So in other words, if I go in at 385, if I go in 385, it's like, oh yeah, no, the person's like, excellent. Well, then we can counter it, 295 or something, or 292, and we're good to go. Versus somebody goes to 300. So you got to really think about that. Some of this, and I love how someone mentioned earlier about confidence. Confidence plays into this, because you got to be willing. First of all, you have to know the person. Again, it's a little different with this example I'm using, but you have to know the person, where they're going to go, and how they're going to possibly react, what their personality is, and in what you're going to be bringing forward. So others who aim high may be more likely to put the first number on the table. So it anchors to it, essentially, right? What is that? And when there's an attractive offer, sometimes, if I'm the seller of a house, sometimes I'll just grab it, right? Because if my confidence is low and someone comes, oh, that seems good enough, let's just take that, as opposed to countering. Person who actually goes in with higher aspirations will actually counter that as well. So again, just start thinking about that. Which is your approach? Do you go one way or the other? Are you too hard sometimes and people walk away? It depletes the relationship. Or are you the other way, which I'm more lean towards that way. All right, so BATNA. Anyone have heard of BATNA? BATNA is, well, it's written here, best alternative to a negotiated agreement. So in other words, if I'm going out, for example, if I'm going out for my home policy. So if I'm going out for my home policy, then what's my best alternative? So let's just say that your firm has increased, the rates went up 7% last year, and then this year it's coming in another 10% higher. I might not be sure I'm getting the best deal. And then I find out that someone else, I don't know, call him ABC Company, has a policy for actually 30% lower than what you're offering. So I'm thrilled. I'm absolutely looking and going, wow, well, why wouldn't I switch? So why would you think that could happen? You guys, you see this all the time. I mean, what really could that be about? When someone comes in and says, well, I can get it 30% cheaper. And you know the market really well. So what could that be? Yes, reduction in coverage, love it. It could absolutely not be apples to apples. But in the client's mind, I've got a great alternative to negotiating with you. So if I'm talking to you at 30%, I can't go back. What are the chances I can go back to Susie at your company? And first of all, I don't like conflict, so I don't really want to try to negotiate 30%. I'm going to go for my best alternative. But the challenge there is if you're that person, and if I'm going out and looking for insurance, I have to understand that I'm looking at apples to apples. Okay? Because what it is, the best alternative is if I can't negotiate with your company, or if I can't negotiate with my colleague, what's the alternative? What's the best alternative out there? Can I do it myself if it's working with a colleague? Is it something where I can tap into some other alternative, right? This really helps you understand where your negotiations are going to go. What is your walking away point? And this is what helps you understand what that is. But you have to know with a BATNA, you have to understand is real, it's factual, it's something in hand, and it's comparable. Like, so what are you losing? Yeah, it's not as good as what I could negotiate with you guys because I have that trust, I have invested in you, you know me, I had a claim years ago, you were great in dealing with it, but what's the alternative? And again, you got to remember too what the needs of your client are. So it helps people understand what the deals are. So where's your BATNA? Every time you go into a negotiation, what are your alternatives? And this is where the preparation really comes into play. Okay, hang on now. So when negotiating, take time out for an explicit translation process to ensure that you aren't giving up a good deal in the hand for a BATNA in the bush. I found that quote. I thought I'd throw it in there. So, you know, you've got something here. I've got a relationship with you guys. This is all good. It's 30% higher, right? So check it out. Make sure that there isn't some alternative. And again, think about that from your client's perspective too, because you know a lot of them are going to be going out and getting alternative quotes. So if that's the BATNA, what do you think the WATNA is? What do you think? I lost my chat screen. Just a second here now. There we go. Worst, yes. It is absolutely your worst alternative to a negotiated agreement. So in other words, if this doesn't happen, right, what's the worst thing out there that could happen to me? It's the what if. So I do this with my clients all, worst case scenario, right? Let's walk through the worst case scenario because it really helps you better understand what's going to happen. So if my worst case scenario is like, could be the end of the world for me or the company or whatever it is, it really helps you understand that you need to stay at the table. This needs to happen. Say it's your biggest client. Say it's your biggest commercial client, like you have a big team working on this client, right? So what if we lose that? Now, that's the other question. You have to have conversations around that and think about it from a BATNA or a WATNA with your clients. And BATNA is more important to really understand that you have alternatives, right? If this doesn't work, yes, we will survive, right? And here's how we're going to do it. So it's really important to have that BATNA. You never want to go into a negotiation without the concept of, okay, if we don't have this, what are we going to do? But at the same token, what is the worst case scenario? And it really helps you understand how important it is to stay at the table. And if you think that BATNA is actually not great, right? You always want to make sure that you have one, but if it's not great, it gives you the point where you're willing to actually give in on things, right? Well, I'm willing to give in on the following. We can give them, hey, maybe we'll give them some business analysis, you know, in terms of risk analysis, or maybe we'll help them with this or help them with that because we got to stay at the table and we know that's important to them. Okay, but you have to understand what your assumptions are, right? What are you assuming? And here's the one thing I see oftentimes, and I've seen it a lot in your industry, is that people, oh my God, it's our biggest client, and we can't lose them. Well, no, you can. It could happen. But so what is your backup plan? right? What is that plan? What does it look like? And you flesh it out so there's some confidence, but it also lets you know exactly how far down the line that backup plan is. And if you say, no, there isn't a backup plan, I would push you to actually go and be creative, get a little brainstorming group together and talk about it. So we lose client ABC company. Then what does that mean? How are we going to replenish that? What does that mean for our organization? Could there actually be an advantage there? Sometimes I've seen people kind of go, well, yeah, that client's been pushing us on the premiums forever. We're just like down to the wire. We can't cut it anymore. We're not going to make any money. And you've got a staff of like 6 people supporting, on and off through the year. So again, it comes down to, well, are they really worth it? Right? And it really gives perspective. So anytime you ever hear we can't lose that client, think about it. What if you do? What are the alternatives? And try to create a best alternative that may be even better than you're thinking right now. But the worst case scenario, yes, sometimes people don't go there as well. And the worst case scenario, can you handle it? Is it going to shut the company down? What is the worst case scenario? And so a lot of times when I do it in coaching and we walk through, so what if exercise? So what if that happens? What would you do? And again, going to the worst case scenario, you kind of go, yeah, it would really suck. And this would happen and we'd have to lay off somebody and we'd have to do this, this, and this. But at the end of the day, we'll survive. It gives a sense of confidence there as well. So get your BATNA in order and get your WHATNA in order. And understand what the alternatives are and what is fact, right? So you understand where you need to be, how long you need to be at that table, and what you can possibly negotiate. So between the two, you're going to clue up now in a minute. Gosh, time goes fast. So the zone of possible agreement, right? You brainstorm about your client or your colleague or whatever it is you need to do. And you see this with kids all the time. Come on, where's the possible agreement here, right? What do they want? What do they need? And what am I willing to agree to, right? Where is that zone of possible agreement? So in terms of the next session, we just scratched the surface. We're going to walk through what makes a successful negotiation. We're going to walk through the styles. We're going to talk a little bit about the process. Very quickly, we'll walk through process. That won't take long. And we'll actually, tips and tricks, I think is going to be a big one. So what are some things to think about when you're in the negotiation? For example, what words should you listen for? When you walk away, what does that look like? How do you make that happen? If respectfully rejecting something, as an example. So we'll walk through, so it'll be a little more detail into the actual negotiation itself next time around. So hopefully you're starting to think a little differently about your negotiation skills. And if there's any specifics for next week, I will be asking you as well a little tip. One of the first things I will be asking you about as well is what are the skills needed to be a negotiator. So maybe think about the skills that you have that are really good as a negotiator and some skills that you maybe could do to have more of. So we'll talk about those as well. Anyway, I can't believe it's time up, but we'll talk to you in a couple of weeks and enjoy. And if you negotiate anything between now and then, hopefully you'll use some of these concepts. All right, thanks so much.